Now we are recorded. Okay, so this week's broadcast is being sponsored by the Balter family, the Ilu Nishmas, Rabbi Yonis and Gershon, Rabbi Yisrael Alevi, Olav Shalom, and Mrs. Balter, Tzipoyer Rachel, Basar Simcha, Allah Shalom. Today is also the orchard of my father, Rabbi Yisrael ben Rabbi Yitzchak. His neshama should have an aliyah. My father, I once found a sefer in my house called Kedushas Basic Nesses. And it's an interesting sefer because it's written, if you open it up on the left side, or when it's lying on its left side, then it's in Hebrew. If you turn the book over to the right, then it's in English, the sanctity of the synagogue. So we used to always leaf through it. So we found out that there's an inscription in it from a rabbi of a shul thanking my father for upholding Kedushas Basic Nesses. And the story is there was a shul somewhere in Toronto. Shlomi Goldreich knows where it was and what it was. And there was some type of function that the people there, some people there pulled the mechitza down. And my grandfather said, we can't go into a shul function if there's no mechitza there. And he asked my father to put it up. And my father put it up, and then someone took it down again. So then he asked my father to put it up and to stand on one end. And he asked my uncle to stand on the other end and to hold it up so that no one should be able to take it away. And that ended up creating a change in the Bris Medrash that they instituted that there has to be mechitzas. Sometimes people ask why I always make such a big deal on mechitzas because of that story. And ever since then they started using mechitzas. So it was a big schos. Anyway, let's go weiter. We discussed yesterday the two approaches of Rebbe Eliezer and of the Rabbanon as to how we know that a Mitzvah needs to use a tar when he shaves his head off. Not his head off, his hair off. I apologize. I'm thinking too much of the Purim spirit already. So it's all based on the machloikis in what is the halacha about the prohibition to cut one's beard. And we learned that the Tanakama holds that the issur for us to cut our beard are only using a tar, only if you use a razor. Any other way to remove a beard, like picking your hair out, that would not constitute the lav. Rabbi Eliezer, on the other hand, says that would constitute the lav. And from there stemmed a whole approach in this sugya. Let's focus on the Rabbanan first. Since the Rabbanan have determined that the only prohibition to cut your beard is with a tar, he analyzed the psukim by Mitzvah. There's redundancy in the psukim by Mitzvah because the psukim by Mitzvah say Veskol Sa'ara Yigaleach, and then it lists off and itemizes Roishai Vesakanai. So let's focus on the Zakanai. Why does the Torah have to tell you Zakanai? Is that not part of Allah's here? Elamai, it's teaching you that if you have a prohibition to cut your hair, not stop a prohibition, you have a lav and a say. For instance, a kohen has both a lav and an say that's prohibiting him from shaving his beard. You would think that the say of Mitzorah is not doicha, the loisaseh, and the say prohibiting a kohen from shaving his beard. Kamashon Zakanai, the Torah is saying, you, Mr. Kohen, I want you to cut your beard as well if you're a Mitzorah in the entire process. Now, why would that be necessary if you could cut your beard in a different way and still be Mekayim, the requirement of Mitzorah? It must be that the only way to fulfill the requirement of Mitzorah is through a tar. That's how the Rabbanan know it. Now, Rabbi Eliezer agrees to that drasha, but the problem is Rabbi Eliezer holds that it could be yotze anyway. I mean, from this alone, you wouldn't know because the prohibition for a person to cut his beard is any way he cuts his beard, it's prohibited. So therefore, you would need zakanai by mitzvah, no matter what type of cutting you would use. So you don't have proof from zakanai that a mitzvah needs to use a tar when he cuts his beard. Now, there's also the word roishai. Why was the word roishai in the pasuk mentioned? So according to the Rabbanan, being that we're going now according to the Rabbanan, they use roishai, which is what we learned yesterday, to tell you that even though hakafash kalarai shma kafa, and there's a lav for you to cut all your hair off on your head because it says lo shakifu pas roishchem. Nevertheless, I say doicha loisaseh, and the mitzvah say of Mitzvah trumps the Isser to cut someone's hair, to cut someone's face off. Rabbi Eliezer had a different approach. Rabbi Eliezer learned it's from Roishai where we learn it, because Roishai is telling you that not only a regular person should cut his hair off, but even a Nazir has to cut his hair off. Now a Nazir has a prohibition to cut his hair, but there's a prohibition and an assay. So there's a loiza of assay prohibiting a Nazir from cutting his hair off. Now, what type of cutting hair by a Nazir is also? There was a machlokes tanoim between Rabbi Yonasan and Rabbi Yoshia. And Rabbi Yonasan said that a Nazir is only prohibited to cut his hair off using a tar. Any other way that he would remove his hair would not be prohibited by a Nazir. So therefore, we have the pasuk of Roishai. That's telling you very specifically that the Mitzvah being Matar himself has to cut all the hair of his hair off. And it's telling us Roishai, even if you happen to be a Nazir, and you're also in the Tahira process of Mitzvah, you still have to cut off all your hair. That's telling you a Chiddush. Because since the only way that a Nazir cutting his hair being prohibited is if it's a tar, and we need a pasuk of Rosh to tell me that a Mitzvah could do it anyway, it must be the same logic as before. It must be that the only way you could be Mekayim, the Chiyuv of cutting your hair by Mitzvah, is with a tar. So those were the two approaches. As an aside, we benefited from some light that Rish Lakish shed on the sugya of a Seder Chaloshah, that you only say a Seder Chaloshah if there's no way to fulfill the Asay without violating the Loishah. If you had any other way, surely Asay would not be the Chaloshah. And the Victor raised yesterday, so why is it that by Gedilim B'tzitzis, there's no other way? Just use the same min of whatever it is the beggar is made out of. The answer is because of the Psil Techelas. The Psil Techelas also always has to be wool. And therefore, for a linen beggar, you will be forced to use wool, and therefore you need a Seder Chaloshah. Shlomo, you asked, why doesn't the Gemara say in the Tzrichasa, it's the Seder Chaloshah and the Seder Chaloshah Vasei? When you learn Tosfos, it's pretty clear that that's very much wrapped into the fabric of what the Gemara is saying. So that's basically my way of saying I'm not 100% sure what the answer is, but Tosfos speaks about it a little bit. Okay, that's number one. No, then we have the halacha of Seder Chaloshah by tzitzis. The other makar, the makar that Rabbi Eliezer would use, Seder Chaloshah, would be the sugya of Gedilim Patachol and Silva Shabbos. We see that you're allowed to put on tzitzis even though it could be litaklayim. Interesting enough, there was a time during the Gemara's time where there was an issue with Kala Ilan. Kala Ilan is the Chinese knockoff of Tchelas. Now the problem is, if you have Tchelas, but if you're using Kala Ilan, you're mamish violating a lav of shatness. You're mamish violating a lav of shatness because you're not being mekayim the mitzvah. So at the time when Kala Ilan was prevalent, there was a time where the Chachamim said, don't wear tzitzis on linen clothing. It's not worth it because you might end up being over a lav if you're using fake tchelas and you're not mekayim the mitzvah. Which gets into a whole lumdus. There's a whole big lumdus of in order for asay to be the chaloshah, does it have to be that the asay and the lav comes at exactly the same time or not? Because it's relevant here in Nazir. Because let's think about it. How much hair does a Nazir have to cut off to violate Naziris? One hair. How many hairs does he have to cut off to be Mekayim the mitzvah tzedlachas? He has to cut it until the last hair. That means that say he's being over the Loishah at the moment he cuts the first hair. But he's not going to be Mekayim Dasei until much later after he gets all the hair off. And it's even possible that something will go wrong and he won't even be able to finish. And it'll only be allowed. So how can you say the Chaloshah? So there's a lot of Torah and Lomdus in the parasha, in the sugya of Seder Chaloshah. Could be if it's impossible to be Mekayim Dasei without the Loishah, even if they don't happen at the same time, it's also Doicha. But there's a lot of Torah discussed on exactly how Seder Chaloshah works. We do not have time right now. Okay. The next thing we had some interesting shilas about if someone cuts off all of his hair and leaves two hairs, and now he wants to come back and cut those last two hairs off. Abai wants to know what happens if his hair grew in before he had a chance to get to those two hairs. So that was a Abaye Shaila. Rava Shaila was after we amended it, and after Shir yesterday, when I actually learned properly the Tosfos and the Mefarsh and Chaim showed me, the Shaila was someone made his Giluach when there was a Chiv Giluach on his whole head, but he left over 2 hairs. So he has not yet discharged his Chiv for Giluach. And then what happened is before he had a chance to cut off the last 2 hairs, one of them fell out. Now, when there's only one remaining, there's no more Chiv Giluach anymore. But he had not yet fulfilled his Chiv Giluach. So he's Kerech Mikan and Mikan, literally, he doesn't have the hair, but he does have the hair. And therefore, the Gemara fears always, even though Lamaisi, he has no hair left, nevertheless, a mitzvah Giluach Enkan, he was not Mekayim, his mitzvah Giluach. Which takes us to today's daf, and I'm going to move quickly because I very much want to try to finish most of Purim's daf. It could be a little misleading. That's right. Zok Gemara. Nazir choyfeif umefasfeis. And Nazir is a lot of shampoo his hair and scrub his hair, and we're not going to say that that's surely going to lead to him removing hair of a loy soirik. You don't want to comb it because when you're combing it, it's much more likely that it's going to tear your hair out. That's why on Shabbos we know how to comb our hair. Zok Gemara choyfeif umefasfeis. But what if it does pull his hair out? Would you not be over? Mani Rab Shimon, this is going according to the Shas wide sheet of Rab Shimon, who holds the Omar Dover She'ein Mischaven Mutter. When you do something without kavanah, I'm scrubbing my hair. I don't want my hair to fall out. To the contrary, I don't want to plug my drain. I'm scrubbing my hair. I don't want it to fall out. It fell out, but it was not intentional. That will be mutter. Avaloi Seirik. But if you comb, then it would be not allowed. Why not? It's also Dover Shein Mechaven. You're not trying to tear your hair out, you're just trying to comb it. So that must be also no Rabbanon. So are you going to say that Reisha Rab Shimon, Chayfif and Mefasis is Rab Shimon, and Soirik is the Rabbanon, V'Sefer Rabbanon? Amar Rabbano, Kula Rab Shimoni, but Kala Soirik Lahashim Nimin Miduldolis Mischaven. The direct intention, this is not a Dover Shein Mechaven. When you're combing your hair, you want to pull out the tangled and the loose hairs. That's part of what a normal comber wants to do. So it's not a Dover Shein Mischaven. There's also the concept of sikreisha, which means in the olden days they didn't have tennis balls. What the kids played with were the head of a chicken. So what if a guy needs a ball for his kids because he's trying to nap on Shabbos afternoon, and the kids are making a racket and need to get them a toy. So he wants to chop off the head of a chicken. I don't want to kill it. I just want to chop off the head of a chicken because I need a ball for my kids. So the Gemara says, sikreisha, is it possible to cut off the head of the chicken and the chicken shouldn't die? And therefore, even if it's a Dover Shein Mischaven, it will still be awesome. That's where it comes from, yeah. Zok to Gemara, you know what? Because by Chassidim they don't play ball. So the Leishers from these Sachen. Chassidim try to avoid this because they don't want to admit that there's such a thing as playing ball. So a Litvak once told me, what's the first letter in the Torah? Beis. What's the last letter in the Torah? Ball. That's right. Zok to learn Torah if I must be in ball. No, ball. My son always tells me from Ura, if you don't have an outlet, you can't plug. Everyone needs an outlet. Can you plug if you don't have an outlet? Can you plug in an outlet? Zok to Gemara weiter. Rabbi Shmuel Leimer, the Heilige Mishnah. Rabbi Shmuel Leimer, lo yochuv ba'adama. You should not scrub your hair with earth. For those people who are not in the trades, there are special soaps that tradesmen buy that have sand in them. So when you scrub, it's called the scrubbing compound. So when you scrub it together, it gets all the grime off. Lawyers should use that as well, but it wouldn't even work for them. Their dirt is so deep-seated, even that wouldn't work. But in the trades, we have such a thing. So the halacha is Rabbi Shmuel Leimer, lo yachav ba'adama, one should not be because it takes off the hair. Now this is directly arguing, of course, with the Tanakama, who says Nazir choyfeif. Shmuel says you can't be choyfeif because it takes the hair out. So Iboilu, the Gemara wants to know what exactly does Rabbi Shmuel mean. It's only because we know it definitely takes out your hair. Maybe because since it's possible and some of them are very corrosive, some of them will pull your hair out, therefore stay away from the ball. What's the difference? What the reason is? More simply, what if someone comes up with a new product? This scrubbing compound will for sure not pull out your hair. Is it allowed or not? Tanan, if you hold the only reason why Reb Shmuel said it was halacha, it's because we know for sure it's going to pull his hair out. Well, then heicha yadinan, heicha yadin gloy masra. If you have one that you know won't do it, sharper you can use it. You cannot use any type of rubbing sandy compounds because of those that will tear your hair out. Then klal loy, you surely wouldn't be able to use it at all. Teku, we have a suffix. What is it that Reb Shmuel meant? I don't know, maybe that's what's in brackets. A Nazir that was drinking wine all day long without multiple asrois, he's only chayiv one set of petch. Every drink he took, they warned him, don't drink, you're going to get malchus. Then what if he was doing the same thing with giluach? Same thing with matama. There's one fundamental difference. When you drink more wine, you drank more wine. When you cut more hair, you cut more hair. When you become tummy again, you don't become more tummy. So that's what the Gemara is going to analyze. Since you're not adding any tumah, why is it that you get more malchus? Gewaltig. Zogt Eilig Gemara Itmar, we have a machlokes. It's actually it's not focused. It's not a machlokes. Itmar says gezogt geworden. This is actually not a machlokes. Amar Rabba, Amar Rav Huna. Mikra Mole Dibur Akos. The pasuk is quite clear in what halach is. It says lo yitama. So let's have a look. Kol yemei haziroi lashem al nefesh mesh lo yavoy. There's a lot of lo yavoy, and lo aviv ul imay ul achav ul achoshe lo yitama. He's like a kohen gadol, a Nazir. He's not even allowed to be with tama to his 7 kroivim. So zokt the heilige Gemara. Mikra malay dibra akos of lo yitama. So kishu omer lo yavoy. What is the lo yavoy for? La sira ala tuma. We have a hasara for the tuma. La sira ala bia. So you see that there's 2 yisurim involved in a Nazir. He's not allowed to come into a place where there's tuma, meaning he cannot come into an oil hames. There's a separate chiyuv for that, and there's another chiyuv for becoming tamei. As the Tosfos says on the 3rd line from the top, lachzir ala tuma, lachzir ala bia. Like the Gemara is going to explain, kisheniknas la oil hames, when he walks into an oil hames, im hisru boy mishum lo yitama. They were both together, which we're going to see how that works. Okay. So Zok to Gemara, but if he was matama twice, then in fact he wouldn't get 2 malchus. If it's 2 different things, he gets malchus. Zok Toshus avol toma loy miskachas lo sheyischai v'shtayim im hizru boy al titma. Of course, our mission says you do get multiple malchus for tumah. So that's what we have to work out. Rabba, in the name of Rav Huna, said that wouldn't work. So how is Rav Huna, based on the way Rabba quoted him, how is that going to shim with our mission? Rabbi Yosef argued on Rabba, Halakim, Rav Huna Avada said that afilu tumah v'tumah, you do get 2 malchus, like our mission says. Rav Huna said, Nazir show you I mean the basic chorus, Vashitu loy mesai, umesacher, and Nazir was in the basic chorus, and they gave him his mace or another mace, v'nogabai chayiv. So even though he's tamei already, he's chayiv again. Am I hametamei v'koyim? Is he not tamei already? And according to you, Rabba, the way you quoted Rav Huna, once he's tamei, he wouldn't be able to get a second kitzur of malchus. El lab shmamina, Amar Rav Huna, afilu tumah v'tumah. Even though you're tamei already, if you become tamei again, you get another set of malchus. Eisvei habai, frekt habai. Koyin shayolay mace munachal kseifoy. A koyin had a mace on his shoulder. He was carrying a mace. He was bearing a mace. And then they passed him either a mace that's one of his kroivim or any mace. And he touched it. You might think that he would be chayiv because he's being mitam himself a second time. And the Gemara, the Rishonim tell us that there's a connection. There's a limud from Naziris to Kahuna. So their halachas in Tumah are parallel. The halach is chayiv. You might think chayiv. It says by the kohen in Tumah, or not all of the restrictions that a kohen has. It says he should not be mechal. It says which is the Kohen Gadol. When a mikdash lo yetze, v'lo yechalel es mikdash lo yikav. So we learn from there, b'misha eina mechulel. If you're not mechulel, if you're not tamei already, that's where there's a chiyuv and an iser for a Kohen Gadol to become tamei. Yotazeh shu mechulel v'oimid. So we have a kasha. How could you say that you get malchus a second time? It says over here Yotazeh shu mechulel v'oimid. Amalei, so we told him back, you have a good kasha from there. I have a kasha from the Mishnah. But so we have a steer, lakashna adodi. On the one hand, we have our Mishnah that says every time you're matama, you get malchus again. And then, but the brisa that we have with the kohen says that once he's tamei, he doesn't get malchus again. So how do you explain the two? Zok Gemara, lakasha kan bechiburin kan shaloi b'chibur. If I'm still actually touching the mace, at the time where I touch the second mace, that's where the brisa by Kohen says I don't get a second malchus. I have already a mace on my shoulder. I'm holding the mace. Touching another mace doesn't add any to it. But where does our Mishnah say that you get a second malchus? That's if you touch the mace, you became Thomas mace, but you're not touching it anymore, and now you touch another one. There, you're being Moshe Tumah. So let's think about it. How are you being Moshe Tumah? You're still Tumah. Right? How does it help? So there's two approaches to this. I'm going to focus on Tosfos' approach. Tosfos tells us what's the difference between Chaburin and not Chaburin. So let's see what Tosfos says. Kan shaloi b'chiburin shapirish kfar me'amesh. You're no longer touching it. And v'shitolei meis acher shapirish min harishon. He's no longer touching the first mace. He's about to touch the second mace, and they said, "No, you're not allowed to." There ain't kal mechul v'oimid. There's no mechul v'oimid. Why? What extra tumah am I adding to myself by touching the second mace? Zokt Tosh is beautiful. The Tosh is af boy b'yoyim. There's a Tosh even boy b'yoyim. In other words, if I touch the second mace tomorrow, even though it's tamei, that you wouldn't have a shverkat. Why? It's extra tumah because it pushes it off one day. But even on the same day, if I touch it, I'm adding tumah. What type of tumah can I be adding? If you're touching a mace and I touch you, I'm also tumah for 7 days. Because you're more tumah while you're touching a mace than while you're not. Even like you yourself, when you're touching a mace, you're tumah for 7 days. Even if you let go of the mace, you're still tumah for 7 days. But when you're touching the mace, then you could be matama me for 7 days as well. So that's the rule. If you touch somebody who's touching a mace, then you're matama him for 7 days. And we dash know the yikrav misoiv. If someone touches the person that's touching the mace, I would call it not by not, then you are also going to be tamei. But v'achar shapirish to sefes tumah. So, but after I let go, then if you touch me, you only become a rishon. Yes, because you're adding tumah to yourself. You have a greater tumah by touching this second mace, because while you're touching the second mace, you're more tumah than you were a moment before. The Mefarish, I can't control myself. The Mefarish says a divim shot. The Mefarish says that if while you're touching one mace, you touch another mace, it's one negiah. The Mefarish doesn't have Tosfos' shot. Why? Because the shaila is when someone's touching a mace, if you touch him, why are you also tummy for 7 days? Is it because he has an enhanced tumah, which is how Tosfos learns? The Mefarish knows no, he doesn't have an enhanced tumah. If he's touching the mace, he becomes part of the mace. So when you're touching him, you're connecting to the mace, right? So therefore, that's not even a tesefes tumah. So he has to learn that it's considered one negiah. But let's focus on Tosfos' shot because we needed to follow through in the Gemara. So now we have a new concept of mechubarin, and if someone's still touching the mace, there's no additional malchus if he touches something else, that's tamei. But if he's no longer touching the mace, touching another mace adds tumah. So therefore, our Mishnah that says there's multiple malchus, that's if he let go with one mace and he touched another mace. But if he was holding on to the mace the whole time, then touching another mace does not add any issue. That's right. The tumah b'chibur deraisa. So are you telling me that tumah's chibur is deraisa? You're going to be giving malchus for it. So are you telling me the whole concept of tumah's chibur is deraisa? Let me see what the Bach says. If I could find the Bach. Rabbi Yitzchak said, by Yosef Amar Bianai, yes, for Truma and Kachim, we'll be machmer not to use the Truma, not to use the Kachim, if it was touched by somebody who became Tamar through Chiburin. But to say that someone shouldn't bring a Korban Pesach or to give Malchus to Nazir, no, you don't say that. The Amr Dairaisa, but if you hold the Tumas Chiburin as the Dairaisa the Kalocha, Maishna, what should be the difference? It's either Tamei Legabe everything or not Tamei Legabe anything. Zok the Gemara makes a difference. Kan b'chibur adam b'adam, kan b'chibur adam b'meis. The halach is if you're touching the mace. So we'll use names. Ruvain is touching the mace, and Shimon touches Ruvain. There it's midaraisa. But what if Reuven's touching the mace, Shimon's touching Ruvain, and Levi comes along and touches Shimon? That already is only midarabanan. So therefore, this brisa that says that's the third fellow. That's Levi, right? That's like someone who's holding onto electric and he's dying and he can't save himself, and then someone touches him, and then that guy also gets stuck, and then at a certain point you have to realize don't touch. But at the end of the day, what did Rabbi say in the name of Rav Huna? That tuma v'tuma loy. Why? The mitame v'koyim, because he's tuma already. Tuma ubiyah. So why is tuma ubiyah any better? So we understand now why tuma v'tuma loy. If it's b'chiburin, if you're touching and then you touch again, you're not adding any tuma, right? That was the time that Rabbi said in the name of Rav Huna. But under those same circumstances, Rabbi said in the name of Rav Huna that there's a distinction. Even though you won't get a second malchus for the second tuma, but you get malchus for the bia separately. So how does that work? Tuma bia nami. How is it possible? Hamatama v'koi. The moment he becomes tame, the bia is not changing anything. So why is there a separate malchus for the bia? But when he's tame already, it doesn't make sense to give him malchus for bia, because it doesn't change anything. It doesn't change anything. You can get two lav, and if they happen with vasachas, so you're doing both at the same time. But two lav with vasachas when it's tummy. If I touch two meisim, I don't get two malchus. So therefore, the b is also a din tumah. B is also a din tumah. So this is what the Gemara asks. So let's see what the Gemara says. Tumah b'inami hamatama v'koi. Rabbi Yochanan kan bebayis kan besodeh. Let's see what this means. Zokt the heilige. Vivalt Chaim asked the kasha. Let me learn Tosfos inside. Hamatama v'koi. The dumya, the tumah v'tumah. The chiyuv of bia should be similar to tumah v'tumah. The loki going meisal kseifa. V'shiti lo meisacher koidim shapirish min harishon. Tumah ubia nami heichet the meisal kseifa. You have a mace on your shoulder. Your mamish tummy to mismace. V'halach la'oil mace. V'hizru boy mishum lo yavai. And they tell them don't go into the oil mace. And mishum lo yitam. And don't become tamei. Hamatama v'koi v'mai laki ala bia. As far as you shouldn't be mechuyev for bia either. Even though it's bia, it's not tumah, but it's the same. It's the lav preventing him from tumah. Even the gave a mace upirish v'nichnas lo mace. And if it's speaking in a case where he wasn't any longer touching the mace, and now he's just walking into an oil mace, ha'afilu tumah v'tumah like ishtayim. There, even by tumah v'tumah would be like ishtayim if it's pirish. So where is there a case where tumah v'tumah you wouldn't get malchus for, and tumah ubiyah you would get malchus for? If it's a case where I'm no longer touching the original tumah, then even by tumah v'tumah we determined that you get malchus. And if I'm still holding on to the tumah, then why should I give a second malchus for the biyah? Okay, that's what the Gemara is going to be focused on. That's going to be what we're going to focus on. But the Gemara is going to talk about, he has a Jewish nose. So his nose is going to get into the oil before he gets it. So the tumah will happen before the biyah. That's what the Gemara is going to talk about. Kan bebayis, nichnas bebayis shebesoichei meis. If you walked into a house that has a mace inside it, v'loy nitma koydem lachein, and he didn't become tumah before, exactly Shloimi's suggestion, oz loki shtayim al lo yitma v'alo yavoy, because they happened at the same time. Shebebia el abayis bo shtayim alav. They both happened at the same time. That's what the Gemara is focusing on. How could you be over Mekayim? How could you be over both lavin That's if they both happen simultaneously. But kan besoda, kloimer kol tumah v'tumah beloy oil, loy mishkachas she's chayiv shtayim b'vasachas. In fact, if there's no oil here, it's impossible to become tamei and to be over al bia at the same time. If you touch two masons simultaneously, kula chad asrahi, the asra, the lab, the tumah, the hasra is one. It's one hasra and one tumah. But if he was carrying a mace on the shoulder, that's called the chol vayimid. And again, so it has to happen simultaneously, which is exactly what Shlomi is saying. So Babayis were suggesting it happens simultaneously because there's an oil can besada. Frankly, more Babayis tell me how does it work out? Even the aisle yodei, a normal person walks with his hands first. He pushes the door open. It's normal when you enter a room, your hands enter first. So even the oil yodei is taib. The moment your hand is in the oil mace, you become tamei al tumas mace, but you weren't over bia. You didn't enter the house until you're roiv in the house. Ki ayil kula hay tamehu. We got to look at the tiyodim. Ki ayil kulei hatamei. By the time he gets his body completely into the oil to be over bia, he is already tamei. El Amar Belazar tzirif yadai. If it's tzirif yadai, which means he moved his hands behind him, so his hands didn't go in first. So he got his whole body to walk in at the same time. Mishum tuma ika, mishum bialeka. So maybe I'm making mistakes. So let's see. I'm sorry. He purposely pushed his hands in first. So that's a problem, right? Zok Gemara. Right. So you're right. If you put his hand in first, then mishum tamika mishum bialeka, and in fact you have a taina. But v'tzir gufay. But if he didn't stick his hands in first, then tuma ubia v'hadei adadi kasi, and everything comes at the same time. But he's Jewish. How is it possible a yid should go in and his nose won't go in first? I get complimented when someone says that because normally says his stomach gets in first, right? But his nose is nishkaferlich. And therefore, the moment one small part of his body is in, he's going to be tamei, and therefore it cannot be bevasachas anymore. El amarava, that we're going to get to next. El amarava, hichnis yadai mishum tamei ika mishum bialeka, hichnis gufai tuma ubia ba'ada dadi kasher. In fact, the Gemara, Dovi's question. His toes going to go in order to walk in. He's got to stick his toe in. Exactly your question. Ella. So the Gemara says you can't say the toes said you can't say went backwards because then he wouldn't be over else bia because it's not the normal derech. So therefore it has to go forward. Ella Amar Papa going to nichnas b'sheda teva umigdal. He went in a box, so he's not considered inside, and he's not tamei either. And his friend opened up the seal, and Tosha says, of course, he had to help along, because if he didn't help, how do you give him malchus for something that he didn't do? The tuma ubia bahade adadik asyon. The tuma and the bia came at the same time. They're carrying him in. He's a chushav immense. They carry him in a chariot, not in a cardboard box. My Baravashi has a much simpler thing. He came into a house and there's someone about to die. And then the person died. So now they both happened at the same time. The Yosef, once he got in, the Tama Ubia, Dadakasha. So we're going to discuss that in a minute. But you're asking me, why does he get malchus or bia if he didn't do the bia after the person died, before he died? So the answer is that since we know that the goysis is about to die, it's considered they warned him then not to come in because it's not going to work out for you. Okay. So let's see the Heilige Gemara weiter. Let's see the Heilige Gemara weiter. Taner Rabbanan, Leichaloi. It says that a kohen should not become Tamei Leichaloi. Let's see what the lotion of the pasuk is. It says Lo Yitama Baal Ba'amav Leichaloi, to be Mechalim. So what does that mean? Ad Shal Shayamas. Until the person is dead, there's no Isser to touch that person. Rabbi says, we learn it from B'moisam. Let me just see the Bach. Where's my Bach? Rabbi says, Lo Yitama Lahem B'moisam. So we learn Ad Lo Yitama Ad Shayamas. Until the person is dead, there's no Isser. He's not Tomei. So there's two limudim to teach us seemingly the same thing. Rabbi Yochanan, Mashmos Darshan Ikibinai. In fact, there is no machlokes. There is no machlokes. It's just a question of where we know this from, that a person shouldn't go into a room, that a person is allowed to go into the room until the person actually dies. Rish Lakish says no. Goishes Ikibinai. In fact, there is a machlokes here between Rabbi and the Chachamim. Lamanda Amar Mehechaloi, according to the Tanakama, who argues on Rabbi, Afilu Goises. Even the Goises, you're not allowed to go in for. Lamanda Amar B'moisam, but if you learn like Rabbi that it's B'moisam Achiyamas. In Goises Loi, a Goises is no problem. You're allowed to walk into a room with the Goises. So we have a machlokes between Rabbi and the Chachamim, only according to Rish Lakish, if one is allowed to go into a home with the Goises. It's an unbelievable chiddush. Even though the person is not Tomei, are you allowed to go in? You're not allowed to go in. And we're going to see the Maskana after the Gemara. Which is the Tanakama of Rabbi. What are they going to do with the words of Rabbi, that Rabbi darshan? There's a different limud that we learn out of there. The Tanya Rabbi Omer, b'moisam, ein matame, aval matame, b'nega'asam ubezivasam. Even though you're not allowed to be mitame with a mace, a kohen is not allowed to touch a mace, but if his relative, or anybody for that matter, as I think Rabbi Kiveger speaks out, if anybody has a nega, he's allowed to touch someone with a nega. He's allowed to touch someone who's a zov. It's only Thomas mace that he's prohibited from. Let me just see if it's Rabbi Kiveger who speaks it out, because he asked the kasha, what's up if you need a pasuk by kroivim that you could be mitama, you could touch their ziva. Any zov he's allowed to touch. So when did Achronim ask that kasha? Okay, let's go back there. According to Rabbi, doesn't he also need the svara to teach you that a kohen is allowed to touch someone who's a zov? In Kain, lemekra b'mois. My b'moisam shmas minatarti. He's able to extract two drushes from this one word. And I guess the other time it doesn't hold of that diuk. It says instead of b'mois, it says b'moisam. One is that a goisus is not tummy, right? So therefore a kohen's allowed to walk into a place of the goisus. And two is a kohen's also allowed to touch people who are zovim and who are the goyim. Yeah. What will Rabbi use like chali for? If someone's already tummy, he's allowed to become tummy. He needs this far. So okay. Tosfos says here at the end, the kohen ain't muzar ala goises. For here you see that a kohen is not muzar ala goises. Why? Because the only way we have anybody saying that there's a problem with the goises is the Tanakama of Rebbe. Only the way Rish Lakish learned that there's a nafkamina between the two pshatim. It's not mashmois darshan. But according to Rabbi Yochanan, there's no machlokes at all, and there's no problem with the goises. Zok Tosfos the kaim alone Rabbi Yochanan l'gaber Rish Lakish. Since we pass Rabbi Yochanan l'gaber Rish Lakish, there's in fact no machlokes about whether or not a kohen is allowed to walk into a room with the goises. Umiu b'hagaris Abaye b'makom Rabbi Yochanan v'Rava b'makom Rish Lakish. So this turns the whole thing over, because then the halachas could be like Rava, who says like Rish Lakish. Which means there's a machlokes between Rabbi and the Rabbanon as to whether or not a kohen is allowed to go into a place where there's a goisis, and therefore, who do you pass like when Rabbi argues with people? Halacha Rabbi mechavei roi v'loi mechavei rov. So if there's a rov arguing like Rabbi, we don't pass like Rabbi, which means according to the Bahag, who learned that this is a machlokes Abaye and Rava, we'll have to pass like the Rabbanon, where a kohen is not allowed to go into a house with a goisis. Okay. Let's see the Gemara weiter. Meisvei, the Gemara has a kasha on Rish Lakish's understanding of this machlekes. Meisvei. Adam einu matama ela acha teitei nafshay. When is a person tame? Only after the person dies. Va'afilu meguyad, va'afilu goises. Even if the body is already missing parts, and even if he's a goises, he's alive, and there's no tumah. Ulamanda Amar Milahichalai Hakatani the Eino Mitame. I'm sorry. Vafilu Magud Vafilu Goshis is going to be usher, is what it's saying. Even that it's going to be usher. The problem is, according to the Lamanda Amar Milahichalai Hakatani the Eino Mitame. We said that according to the Shita that holds. One second. I'm reading it backwards. Let's start again. Adam is going to be mutter. If we learn Melaychala, which is the Rabbanon of Rebbe, according to Rish Lakish, Hakatani, the Eina Metama, he said that you're not allowed to be Metama, you're not allowed to go into a Goysis. So the Brisa says that a Goysis is not a problem, yet our Rabbanon say a Goysis is a problem. Zok Gemara lean Timuye Adenaf Kanafshe. Eina Chanami. You don't become tame by walking into a room where there's a goyses, but it's still considered lo yechalel. There's still an isser, a prohibition for a kohen to go into that room, even though there's no tumah. The Maisa he's over lechalei. So that although he doesn't actually become tame, it's still a prohibition for a kohen. Zok Gemara, Amar Rab Chisda, because it says lechalei. Yeah, because of the pasuk. Yeah. Yeah. Amar Rab Chisda Amar Rav. Rab Chisda said in the name of Rav, Nikle Roshoi Shel Aviv, if the body of the father was mutilated, for instance, his head fell off, Eina Matamaloi, a kohen cannot be Matama. So Tosfos B'Chayin Hedget Mairi, Shemuta L'Tamil Aviv, Eloi B'Chayin Gadol Nazir. So now we're having a discussion not related to Nazir, which has the same Isurim and Tumah as a Kohen Gadol, meaning a Nazir cannot even be Matama to his seven Kravim, but a Kohen Hedget could. But that's only if the guf is sholem. If the guf is not sholem, a kohen cannot be metama to his father. My timer, Amar Kra la'aviv. It says la'aviv u'la'imay yitama. Bizman shehu sholem v'loy bizman shehu chos. If the body is missing parts, a kohen cannot be metama to his father. Well, the Bible says it to Rosh, but we're soon going to see not necessarily. Amalei Rav Hamnuna. Rav Hamnuna said, Elamayata ka'odel bepaksa the arvis. What happens if the father is walking in a little bit of a dangerous neighborhood, upaskua gamvela and he got attacked by gangsters, and his head was cut off? Hachanami deloy l'tamalei. Are you going to say that the son, the kohen, shouldn't be metama? No one's going to go retrieve him. Who's going to go retrieve him? Amalei, that's different. Meis mitzvah ka'armit. You're talking about a meis mitzvah. Hashti yeshleimer b'achrini mechayiv. Even not as relative, a kohen's allowed to go deal with a meis mitzvah. But other like again, surely he's going to be allowed to be metapel with his father. In fact, the Gemara, the high meis mitzvah, is this considered a meis mitzvah? But time we learned is a meis mitzvah. What is a meis mitzvah? Kol she'ein loy koivrin. That's only if no one will bury him. What does that mean? Koirei b'cherim oinin loysoi. If the person who's being attacked, the person who's dying, the victim, calls out for help, and somebody will answer him, Ein zeh meis mitzvah. That's not called a meis mitzvah. So why would this be considered a meis mitzvah? For Isle Bara, he has a son, so he shouldn't have the status of a meis mitzvah. He's going to be nishtahi nishtaher. His son can't get him because he's not complete. But on the other hand, he doesn't qualify as a meis mitzvah because he has a relative. You're right. He has a curve to save him. But when he's in a very dangerous neighborhood and he's going in an isolated place, everybody's considered not curve because that's in a difficult situation. I'm sorry? Meis mitzvah be allowed to go. That's right. Meisei, lo yitama. It says, lo yitama. To the sister he can be matama. Lahu matama, ve'ena matama la'evareh. But he would not be able to be matama to any of her evarim. And this means if she's still alive. But one of her evarim fell off, he's not allowed to become tame to bury that evar. He can't even be matama la'evar minachai shalaviv. V'loy la'ever min hamei shalaviv. The aleph sticks in is even la'ever min hamei shalaviv. Aval machzerhu al etem kesayra. But if he buried his father and then they found something missing, he'd be able to go back and be matama again to bury that etem kesayra that they found. Frag the Gemara, my machzerhu al etem kesayra. What exactly does it mean? He can go back on the etem kesayra. Lav lememra the mixer porta. Loy. What we're saying is, how is it possible that he buried his father in the first place if his father was missing etzem kesayra? So you see, Chaim, it's not dafka the roish. How is it possible? If you're saying that if the father is not complete, he can't bury him in the first place, so how is it Nageya being Matama again? How is he Matama originally? It was missing etzem kesayra. So Gemara, Hahir Rabbi Yehudi, in fact, there's a machloikis, and the brisa that we just quoted that says that he can go back. Let's go if he was already Matama with the incomplete goof. That's not following the shita that we're working with. That's following the shita of Rabbi Yehuda, who holds that you could bury a kohen is allowed to be matama even if the goof is missing. The Tanya Rabbi Yehuda Aimer, lo yitama. Let's see the bach inside. Lo yitama ve'enu matama levareh We'll see soon. So I'm reading the bachs. I'm reading the bach. She'ein adam mitame al etem kesayra me'aviv avalu choizer al etem kesayra me'aviv. So if there was just an etem kesayra, you wouldn't be able to bury that alone. But if you already buried his body, which was missing an etem kesayra, which clearly you'd be allowed to do, you would go back to it. V'atani Rav Kahana, Rabbi Lozer ben Yaakov, lo yitama. Let me see the bach again. Lo yitama. Ve'ena matama le'vareah. Prat l'kezayis min hameis. But if it's a kezayis min hameis, or kezayis netzel, which is some type of liquid that comes out of a mace, umoli tarbid rekev, or a full spoon of rot, there you cannot be matama for that. Yochel lo yitama l'shedra u'legoylus u'lerev binyana. You might think you cannot be matama either if there's a full spine and a full spine in the skull, or most of the bones, as far as bones that comprise most of the body, even though it's not a majority of the bones, but we're talking about some larger bones, or l'rev binyana, if you have most of the bones, even though it doesn't comprise most of the body. So kasav b'mar talayim. So again, you cannot be matama for kazayis menes, kazayis natzo, but you could be matama if there's a more significant portion of the body that's there. That's right. That's right. Because this Rabbi Yehuda was arguing. That's exactly the point. You're trying to show that there's someone who argues on the time that we were working with. You might think he should have been matama for those of others. Amrit ma choishay miyuchedes shagufa tali boy. He has a responsibility for her because he's related to her. And he could be matama for those. Any relative that he's responsible for, so the Gemara asks, here again you see a raya that you could bury a kohen's allowed to be matama to a body that's not complete. In fact, that's also Rabbi Yehuda. In other words, we're trying to illustrate that, sure, we're going with the shita that if the body is not complete, a kohen cannot be matama. But there is a shita of Rabbi Yehuda who holds that a significant part of the body you would bury. So a kazayis alone he couldn't be matama to, but he could be matama to a significant part like Rabbi Yonai or Gilgolis and Shedra. There he could be matama, and once he's matama, then he's allowed to go back for other small pieces, like we saw. For Rav, we have all these brises that indicate that you are allowed to bury. A kohen could be matama for a not complete body. So Rav, who's his Tana? Where do we find the Tana who says you can't? For Rav Domer Kai Tana, the Tanya, Ma'isa Shemeis Ovid, Rabbi Yitzchak Beginzik. Rabbi Yitzchak's father died. He only found out about it after 3 years. Uba v'sholosh Rabbi Yeshua ben Elisha v'dalat zkenim she'imai v'amarim that told him la'aviv you could only be matama to your father bisman shu shalem v'loi bisman shu chaser. And if he was buried 3 years ago, he's for sure chaser, and you're not allowed to be metama to him. So this shows that you cannot be metama, even if most of the guf is there, even if a small part is missing, you cannot be metama, which is consistent with what we learned. But Abada, there's a Shita of Yehuda who holds that you could be metama for a significant portion of the body, you could be metama. He's going to go metama. He was going to go there and be metama. So you have a good kasha. You're right. I apologize. Tosha, so you're right to the cover the kivri avoisa. You want to be mefanim. So there he has to become tummy for. So there's a whole big shaila that Tosha brings up over here, and that is, what is the halacha? A kohen is being metabel with a meis mitzvah. But there's a yisrael who could deal with it. Is a kohen allowed to do it? So we know the halacha is not. If a kohen is there to be metabel with a meis mitzvah, and there's also yisrael, he's not allowed to. He's not allowed to be metabel, and there's also a halacha whether or not he has to pay, to have somebody else do it, so that he shouldn't have to become tamei. So they're right. So if it's a karev, but it's not one of the karevim that he's allowed to be metama to, so there he has to pay somebody else to do it. He's not allowed to do it by himself. So even though it's sort of his responsibility, nobody else is going to do it. Yeah, nowadays we have Chaver Kedusha, so to do it for free. And that's what the whole time was about. The Razan spoke out a terrible shaila that came to the night of Yehuda. A fellow lost his arm, and he didn't want to bury it because he wanted to carry it with him. So when he goes to collect money, imagine a guy sits out here in front of the Agoda, says and he's standing there with his arm like disconnected, or he's standing with a foot. It's a tearjerker. For sure, it'll make you give money. The Najmi says, no way, you got to bury that. You have to bury that. I don't know if you remember, it could be you weren't in Toronto. Remember Laser Wyman had an uncle, Fetter Azik, who didn't have an arm? Remember Laser Wyman had an old uncle who didn't have an arm? He walked around, he would see the sheet, the Stalin back, he didn't have an arm. He was missing his arm, which he lost in an industrial accident as a young man. When he died, they needed to locate where his arm was. His arm had been buried, but they forgot. It was years later, like 30, 40 years later. Now he died. They got to find his arm to bury it together with his goof. And I remember it's a whole tumult to track down where his arm was buried, because they had to bury the whole goof together.